If you've been scrolling through endless lists of gaming rigs, watching countless best PC videos, and still feel stuck on whether a pre-built machine is worth the premium, this review is going to help you cut through the noise. I've spent the past week comparing a handful of mid-range builds, reading through forums where people dissect every component, and even talked to a couple of owners who actually use the same hardware for both gaming and creative work. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the ViprTech Reaper 3.0 is positioned as a ready-to-play desktop that promises high-end gaming, smooth streaming, and even VR without you having to tinker with cables or BIOS settings. The headline specs an AMD Ryzen 7-8700F, an RTX 5070, 16GB of DDR5 RAM, and a 1TB SSD are clearly meant to attract serious gamers who also care about future-proofing. But the real question is whether those numbers translate into a machine that feels right in everyday use, and whether the price you're paying is really giving you more than a custom-built combo would. Let's start with the everyday setup. The Reaper 3.0 arrives in a sleek white chassis with a tempered glass side panel that lets you see the internal lighting. The built-in RGB strip cycles through a few subtle colors, and it's easy to sync with most motherboard software if you like to tweak the mood. For a lot of buyers, especially streamers or content creators who have their background on camera, that visual flair adds a bit of personality without being obnoxious. The case also fits neatly under a standard desk, leaving enough room for a 27-inch monitor and a proper keyboard tray, something that's often overlooked when people chase after a massive tower. Boot times are where the insanely fast claim gets put to the test. With the 1TB SSD, you'll notice Windows 11 popping up in under 10 seconds from a cold start. That's a big win if you're the type of person who multitasks. Maybe you fire up a game, launch Discord, and have a web browser ready for research, all in one seamless flow. In my own test, swapping between a Fortnite match, a video editing session in DaVinci Resolve, and a quick Zoom call took barely any lingering. The SSD also leaves plenty of space for a library of modern titles, though you'll still need external storage if you keep a massive archive of older games or raw video footage. Now, about that RTX 5070. It's a step below the top-tier 6080, but in the real world it still crushes 1080p and 1440p titles at high settings. I ran a few benchmarks in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Cyberpunk 2077, and the newer Starfield. At 1440p, you were consistently in the 80-90 FPS range with ultra settings, and the card handled ray tracing fairly well when you turned on DLSS. In practical terms, that means you can game with the visuals turned up without constantly dipping below the smooth 60 FPS threshold. If you're into VR, the card meets the recommended specs for Oculus Quest Link, and the experience felt fluid, no stuttering that you sometimes see on lower-end rigs. The Ryzen 7-8700F, while lacking integrated graphics, shines when you start mixing gaming with content creation. I edited a short 4K video while running a background livestream, and CPU usage stayed under 80% on most cores. The 16GB of DDR5 RAM is adequate for current games, but if you're planning to run a lot of virtual machines or keep dozens of tabs open while streaming, you'll notice the occasional hitch. Adding another 16GB isn't a nightmare. ViprTech leaves 2 RAM slots open, but it's an extra cost you should be aware of. One hidden trade-off most buyers discuss is the power supply. The Reaper ships with an 800W gold-rated unit, which is more than enough for the current configuration, and it provides headroom for future upgrades like a more powerful GPU or additional drives. That said, the PSU is a modular design, and while the cables are well labeled, you'll need to spend a few minutes routing them neatly if you care about airflow. The case's cooling strategy relies on a 240mm liquid cooler for the CPU and 2 120mm fans at the front. In a typical room temperature of 22°C, 72°F, the system stayed under 70°C during extended gaming sessions, which is comfortable. However, if you live in a hotter climate or plan to overclock, you might want to consider swapping to a larger radiator or adding an extra exhaust fan. Who should buy this machine? If you're a gamer who wants to jump straight into the latest titles without building a PC from scratch, and you also dabble in streaming or light video work, the Reaper 3.0 offers a balanced package. The ready-to-play nature eliminates the learning curve of BIOS tweaks, driver installations, and cable management. It's also a solid pick for someone who wants a reliable VR setup without hunting down components individually. The fact that each unit is hand-assembled in the USA and stress-tested adds a layer of confidence if you're wary of cheap overseas builds. Who should skip it? Budget-focused gamers.